A pregnant wife fights for her life during labor, while her husband's ex-lover secretly cuts off her oxygen in the hospital he controls. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe. New stories unfold here every day, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. And don't forget to comment which state you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in. But what the ex didn't know: the mafia boss had surveillance running in every room. And when he watched his wife suffocating on camera, every whisper, every betrayal, every second of cruelty became evidence for his revenge. A luxury maternity wing becomes a crime scene when a mafia boss's ex-lover poses as medical staff and tries to murder his pregnant wife during labor. The ex-lover believes she's untouchable, protected by the chaos of childbirth and the fear everyone has of crossing Castillo Bennett. But what she doesn't know is that the woman she's trying to destroy isn't just the mafia boss's wife. She's the mother of his legacy, the center of his empire, and the one person he installed hidden cameras to protect. What follows is not a battle of violence. It's a war of cold, calculated retribution, where obsession meets power, and love becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. And trust me, when Castillo Bennett walks into that hospital room and plays back that footage, every lie, every touch, and every breath stolen from his wife will be repaid in full. Stay with me until the end, because you won't believe how far a man will go when someone tries to destroy the only thing he's ever truly loved. Drop a comment below and tell me: have you ever trusted someone who betrayed you when you were most vulnerable? Let's dive in. The sound of steady monitors filled the sterile air of the private maternity wing, rhythmic at first, then faltering. Soft fluorescent lighting bathed the room in clinical white, casting long shadows across equipment that hummed with mechanical precision. Kinsley Bennett lay in the hospital bed, her breathing labored, her body exhausted from hours of contractions. Sweat clung to her forehead. Her hands gripped the rails as another wave of pain rolled through her abdomen. She was strong, she had to be. Being married to Castillo Bennett meant living in a world where weakness was fatal. But right now, in this moment, she wasn't the mafia boss's wife. She wasn't a symbol of power or fear. She was just a woman about to bring life into a dangerous world. And outside the frosted glass doors, standing like a statue carved from stone and silence, Castillo Bennett watched. His tailored black suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. Guards flanked him on either side, heads bowed in deference, not daring to meet his eyes. He had built an empire on fear. But the only thing that terrified him now was the thought of losing her. What he didn't know, what no one in that hospital knew, was that someone had already walked through the doors with murder in her heart. Someone who believed she had every right to take back what was stolen from her. Someone who had loved him first.
The door to the delivery room opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. Kinsley's eyes flickered toward the sound. Her vision blurred from exhaustion and pain. Another contraction was building, a wave of pressure that made her entire body tense. She gripped the bed rails harder, her knuckles white, her breath coming in shallow gasps. A figure stepped through the doorway. At first glance, she looked like any other medical professional. Navy blue scrubs that hung perfectly on her slender frame, a surgical mask covering the lower half of her face. Her ID badge clipped neatly to her chest pocket. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, not a strand out of place. She moved with the kind of practiced calm that comes from years in a hospital setting. But something was wrong. Kinsley couldn't place it at first. Maybe it was the way the woman paused just inside the doorway, her gaze sweeping across the room with an intensity that felt more like assessment than care. Or maybe it was the way her eyes, deep brown, unblinking, fixed on Kinsley with a focus that went beyond professional concern. "How are we doing in here?" the woman asked, her voice smooth as silk, pleasant even. She glanced at the monitors, at the 4-drip, at the oxygen line running to Kinsley's nose. "I'm here to assist with your delivery. My name is Nurse Butler." The name hit Kinsley like a physical blow. Butler. Her breath caught, not from the contraction this time, but from recognition. She tried to focus through the fog of pain, tried to see past the mask, past the professional veneer. And then she saw it. The shape of the eyes. The arch of the brows. The way she tilted her head just slightly to the left when she spoke. Mia. Mia Butler. Castillo's ex-lover. Kinsley had seen her face in old photographs. Images Castillo thought he'd destroyed but that Kinsley had found tucked away in a forgotten drawer. A younger woman with wild, passionate eyes standing beside a younger Castillo, both of them laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. Before the empire. Before the violence. Before Kinsley. But this woman standing before her now wasn't wild or passionate. She was controlled, deliberate, and she was inside the one place Kinsley had believed was untouchable. Kinsley opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to call for the real nurses, but another contraction ripped through her abdomen. The pain was blinding, all-consuming. She doubled over, a strangled cry escaping her throat. "Breathe," Mia said softly, stepping closer to the bed. She placed a gloved hand on Kinsley's shoulder, a touch that should have been comforting but felt like ice against bare skin. "You need to breathe through it. In and out. Nice and slow." Kinsley's eyes watered. She tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The contraction held her hostage, every muscle locked in agony. She was trapped, vulnerable in a way she had never been before. And Mia knew it. "There we go," Mia murmured, watching Kinsley's face with an expression that could almost pass for sympathy. Almost. But her eyes remained cold, detached, like she was observing an experiment rather than a woman in labor. "You're doing so well. Just a little longer now." The contraction finally subsided, leaving Kinsley gasping for air. She tried again to speak, her voice barely a whisper. You're sure." Mia's finger pressed gently against her own lips behind the mask, a gesture that might have been playful in another context. Here it was chilling. "Save your strength. You're going to need it." She moved around the bed with practiced efficiency, checking the monitors, adjusting the 4-bag, her movements so normal, so routine, that anyone watching from the hallway would see nothing amiss. Just a nurse doing her job. But Kinsley saw the truth in those eyes. This wasn't care. This was theater. "You know," Mia said conversationally, as if they were old friends catching up over coffee, "I've thought about this moment for a long time. What I would say to you. What I would do." She picked up Kinsley's chart, pretending to review it, but her eyes never actually focused on the words. "I used to imagine all these elaborate scenarios. Confrontations. Screaming matches. Breaking down in tears and begging you to give him back." She set the chart down, her smile visible even through the mask, a soft curve that didn't reach her eyes. "But then I realized something. You didn't take him from me. He chose you. He looked at everything we had, everything we built together, and he decided it wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough." Her voice remained steady, almost pleasant, but something dark flickered behind her eyes. Something broken. "And now look at you," Mia continued, gesturing to Kinsley's swollen belly, to the monitors tracking the baby's heartbeat. "About to give him the one thing I never could. Family. Legacy. A future." Kinsley's heart pounded against her ribs. She glanced toward the door, desperate for someone, anyone to walk in. Where were the other nurses? Where was the doctor? Where was Castillo? But the hallway beyond the frosted glass remained empty. Silent. Don't worry, Mia said, following Kinsley's gaze. She pulled up a stool and sat down beside the bed, settling in as if she had all the time in the world. They won't interrupt. Everyone in this hospital knows better than to question the staff assigned to Castillo Bennett's wife. They're too afraid of him. Isn't that ironic? She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something almost tender. The same fear that was supposed to protect you is exactly what's going to let me finish what I came here to do. Another contraction began building, but this time the pain felt secondary to the terror coursing through Kinsley's veins. She tried to reach for the call button, but Mia's hand was already there, gently, so gently, moving it out of reach. Not yet, Mia whispered, her smile widening behind the mask. We're just getting started. And as Kinsley's body seized with another wave of labor pains, she realized with horrifying clarity that she was completely, utterly alone, trapped in a room with a woman who had nothing left to lose. A woman who had come here not to help her deliver life, but to watch her lose it. The contractions were coming faster now, each one more intense than the last. Kinsley's entire world had narrowed to pain and fear, a combination that left her disoriented, struggling to think clearly through the fog. Mia stood and moved toward the monitors, her movements unhurried, almost graceful. "Let me just check your vitals," she said in that same pleasant, clinical tone. "Make sure everything is progressing normally." But nothing about this was normal. Kinsley watched through half-closed eyes as Mia's gloved hand reached toward the tangle of lines and tubes connected to the machines. She appeared to be adjusting something, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. To anyone glancing through the window, it would look like routine care, a nurse doing her job, monitoring equipment, ensuring patient safety. But Kinsley saw the exact moment Mia's hand found the oxygen line. And she saw the cold calculation in those brown eyes as slender fingers wrapped around the tube. "Your oxygen saturation looks a little high," Mia murmured, loud enough that her voice would carry if anyone happened to be listening. "Let me adjust this for you." The disconnect was so subtle, so smooth, that if Kinsley had blinked she might have missed it. Mia's hand moved, the line came free from its connection, and just like that, the steady flow of oxygen stopped. At first, Kinsley didn't notice the difference. The pain of another contraction dominated everything else. But as it subsided and she tried to catch her breath, something felt wrong. Her chest tightened. Her lungs worked harder but found less air. She gasped once, then again, her body instinctively fighting for oxygen that was no longer coming. Panic flooded her system. She tried to sit up, tried to reach for the line, but her body was too exhausted, too weak from labor. Her hand lifted from the bed rail, trembling, reaching, but Mia gently caught her wrist and lowered it back down. "Relax," Mia said softly, soothingly, as if comforting a frightened child. "Don't fight it. Fighting only makes it worse." Kinsley's eyes widened in terror. She tried to speak, to scream, but she couldn't draw enough breath. Her vision began to blur at the edges. The monitors continued their steady beeping, her heart rate climbing, the baby's heartbeat still strong, but the numbers that mattered, the ones tracking her oxygen levels, were beginning to drop. And Mia stood there watching, just watching. Through the frosted glass, a figure moved in the hallway, a young nurse passing by with a medication cart. She glanced into the room, her steps slowing. Something in Kinsley's posture, in the way her body was straining, must have caught her attention. The nurse stopped completely, her hand hovering near the door handle. But she didn't open it. Her eyes flickered from Kinsley's struggling form to Mia's calm, composed figure standing beside the bed. Then her gaze dropped to the floor. After a long, terrible moment, she pushed her cart forward and continued down the hallway. She had seen. And she had chosen to look away. Mia noticed the interaction and smiled. "You see," she said quietly, leaning closer to Kinsley's face. "No one's coming. They're all too afraid of what your husband might do if they interrupt. Afraid of asking the wrong questions. Afraid of being noticed." Kinsley's gasps became more desperate, more shallow. Her fingers clawed weakly at the sheets. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain now, but from pure, primal terror. Her baby. She had to protect her baby. Mia lowered herself until her lips were beside Kinsley's ear, close enough that her breath was warm against Kinsley's skin. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, intimate, almost loving. "You took everything from me," she breathed. "My future, my love, my reason for living. You walked into his life and erased me like I never existed. Like what we had meant nothing." Kinsley tried to turn her head away, but she didn't have the strength. "So now," Mia continued, her words slow and deliberate, "I take everything from you. Your future, your child, your last breath. And he'll find you here, empty. And he'll finally understand what it feels like to lose the only thing that matters." The room was spinning now. Kinsley's heart hammered against her ribs, working overtime to compensate for the missing oxygen. The baby. She could still feel the baby moving inside her, still fighting, still alive. She had to hold on. Had to survive. But her body was failing. Another nurse appeared in the hallway, older this time, more experienced. She paused at the window, her professional eye immediately catching the distress signals. Her hand reached for the door. Then she saw Mia's face. Saw the ID badge. Saw the authority in her posture. And just like the first nurse, she hesitated. In that hesitation, everything was lost. The older nurse's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. She glanced down the hallway, toward where Castillo Bennett's guards stood like sentinels, and made her choice. She walked away. Mia straightened, satisfied. "Even now," she said, "his power protects me instead of you. Isn't that beautiful?" Kinsley's vision darkened. Her gasps became weaker. And somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard alarms beginning to sound. But they seemed so far away, like echoes from another world. A world she was leaving behind. The youngest nurse on the maternity wing, barely 23, fresh from nursing school, stood frozen in the hallway. Her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to make them stop. She had seen it. She had seen the woman in scrubs disconnect the oxygen line. Seen Mrs. Bennett gasping for air. Seen the way the other nurses walked past, their eyes deliberately averted, their fear of Castillo Bennett stronger than their oath to protect. But Maria Santos wasn't like the others. She had been there the day Kinsley Bennett came to tour the maternity wing 6 months ago. Nervous, excited, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. While the senior staff had bowed and scraped before the Mafia boss's wife, treating her like a throne to be feared, Maria had simply smiled and asked if she wanted to see where the nursery would be. Kinsley had smiled back. A real smile. Grateful. And in that moment, Maria had stopped seeing her as Castillo Bennett's wife and started seeing her as just another mother trying to bring life into a complicated world. Now that mother was dying. Maria's feet moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her past the guards, past the restricted areas, toward the one place everyone knew existed but no one dared to enter without permission. The surveillance room. She burst through the door without knocking, a breach of protocol that could cost her everything, and froze. Castillo Bennett sat alone in the darkened room, surrounded by a wall of glowing monitors. 12 screens displayed different angles of the hospital. Hallways, waiting rooms, operating theaters, and private rooms. His posture was perfectly still, his suit immaculate, his hands folded on the desk before him. He didn't turn when she entered. "Mr. Bennett, Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Sir, your wife. Something's wrong. The nurse in there, she's not." "I know." 2 words. Quiet. Final. Maria's breath caught. She looked at the monitors and saw it. The center screen displayed Kinsley's delivery room in crystal clarity. From this angle, positioned high in the corner, everything was visible. Kinsley's struggling form. Mia standing beside the bed, her posture relaxed, almost casual. And the oxygen line, disconnected, dangling uselessly beside the bed. "You're watching," Maria whispered, confusion and horror mixing in her voice. "You're watching and you're not. How long has she been in there?" Castillo's voice remained eerily controlled, as if he were asking about the weather. "The woman in scrubs. Maybe 10 minutes, but—" "And how long has my wife been without oxygen?" Maria glanced at the screen, her nursing training kicking in automatically. "Based on her respiratory distress, 3, maybe 4 minutes. Sir, we need to." "Who else saw?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Maria's throat went dry. "Nurse Patterson. Nurse Reyes. They saw something was wrong. And they did nothing." It wasn't a question. Castillo's eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching his wife suffocate in real time. Watching the woman he once loved destroy the woman he loved now. "They were afraid," Maria said quietly, though she knew it was no excuse. "Everyone is afraid of you." Finally, Castillo moved. He reached forward and tapped a key on the console. The footage reversed, playing backward until it showed Mia entering the room. Then it played forward again in slow motion. Every moment captured. Every subtle disconnect of the oxygen line. Every whisper in Kinsley's ear. Evidence. Perfect, damning, irreversible evidence. "Mr. Bennett, please." Maria's voice broke. "She's dying. Your baby." Castillo stood in one fluid motion. He removed his suit jacket with deliberate care, folding it precisely and laying it across the back of his chair. Then he rolled up his sleeves, one careful fold at a time, exposing the tattoos that marked his forearms, symbols of a life built on violence and control. When he finally turned to look at Maria, his face was completely blank. No rage, no fear, no emotion at all. Just cold, absolute certainty. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any explosion of anger could have been. "Get the medical team to my wife," he said quietly. "Now. Save her." Maria nodded frantically and turned to run. "And Maria." She stopped, looking back. Castillo's eyes returned to the screen, to Mia's face, frozen in the middle of a satisfied smile. "Bring her to me." The words were spoken softly, almost gently. They sounded like a death sentence. The alarms finally began to sound. Mia stepped back from the bed as the monitors erupted in urgent beeping, the cacophony of medical alerts filling the room. Kinsley's body had gone still, her chest barely rising, her lips tinged with blue. The numbers on the screen painted a picture of a woman slipping away. It was done. Mia felt nothing. No satisfaction. No remorse. Just a hollow emptiness where her heart used to be. She had imagined this moment would feel different. Cathartic, perhaps, or devastating. But instead, she felt only the quiet resignation of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. She moved toward the door with measured steps, her hands steady as she reached for the handle. Behind her, Kinsley's monitor flatlined for a moment before stuttering back to life, weak and irregular. Mia didn't look back. She pulled the door open and stepped into the hallway, expecting to find chaos. Nurses running. Doctors shouting orders. The organized panic of a medical emergency in motion. But the hallway was silent. Impossibly, unnaturally silent. Mia's steps slowed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their sterile glow making everything look washed out, dreamlike. Her footsteps echoed against polished floors. No rushing staff. No emergency response team. Just empty corridor stretching before her. Something was wrong. And then she saw them. The guards. They lined both sides of the hallway like statues. 6 of them, maybe more, their dark suits blending with the shadows. They had always been there, of course, posted at strategic intervals to protect Castillo's territory. But now they were different, positioned, ranged, waiting. As Mia walked forward, each guard turned their head in unison, tracking her movement. But none of them moved to stop her. None of them spoke. They simply watched with the cold, detached attention of men who had already received their orders. And then they stepped aside. All of them. Once. Creating a clear path down the center of the hallway. A path that led to him. Castillo Bennett stood at the end of the corridor, perfectly still. His suit jacket gone. His white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. The lighting cast half his face in shadow, making him look like something carved from marble, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Her feet, which had been carrying her forward with such confidence, suddenly felt heavy. Wong. She stopped walking, her mind racing to catch up with what her instincts already understood. The silence. The guards stepping aside. The way they were all looking at her, not with confusion or concern, but with something closer to pity. He knows. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins. He had known from the beginning. From the moment she walked through the hospital doors. From the second she entered Kinsley's room. Maybe even before that. She thought of the cameras she'd been so careful to avoid in the public areas. The ID badge she'd forged so meticulously. The staff uniform she'd stolen from the laundry facility 3 days ago. But she hadn't thought about the private rooms. She hadn't thought about what a man like Castillo Bennett would do to protect what was his. "Castillo," she said, her voice sounding strange in the oppressive quiet. She tried to smile, tried to find the woman she used to be. The one who could make him laugh, who could soften his edges. "Let me explain." He held up one hand. The gesture was small, simple, but it cut through her words like a knife. Silence fell again. Castillo began walking toward her. His footsteps measured and deliberate. Slow enough that she could run if she wanted to. Slow enough that she could scream, plead, beg for mercy. But they both knew she wouldn't. Because there was nowhere to run in a hospital he controlled. No one to hear her screams in a building where everyone feared him more than they valued their own conscience. She had built her trap so carefully. She just hadn't realized she was the one inside it. When Castillo finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, soft enough that she had to strain to hear it, but cold enough to freeze the blood in her veins. "Did you really think," he said quietly, each word precisely enunciated, "that I would leave her unprotected?" Mia's legs felt weak. She wanted to explain, to justify, to make him understand the rage and grief that had driven her here. She wanted to tell him about the nights she'd spent alone, replaying their last conversation, trying to understand where she'd failed. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth. He didn't care. Whatever they had been to each other once, whatever love or passion or understanding had existed between them, it was gone. Erased. Replaced by something so cold and absolute that it had no name. Behind him she heard it. The rush of footsteps. Maria's voice calling orders. A medical team finally responding to the alarms that had been screaming for minutes. He'd let it happen. Let Mia finish. Let Kinsley suffer. So he could have his evidence. 2 guards materialized at her sides, their hands closing around her arms with professional precision. Castillo stepped closer until he was inches from her face. And still he said nothing. The silence was worse than any threat. Meant he was done talking. The guards pulled Mia forward, their grip firm but not violent. They guided her down the hallway, past the nurses who suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere, past the empty waiting areas, toward a private wing she had never seen before. A wing that didn't appear on any hospital directory. They stopped in front of a heavy door. Solid wood reinforced, the kind that muffled sound. One guard opened it while the other maintained his hold on Mia's arm. Inside was a conference room, spartanly furnished. A long table, several chairs, windows with blinds drawn tight, and cameras. She could see them now, mounted in each corner, recording everything, just like the ones in Kinsley's room. The guards released her and stepped back, taking positions on either side of the door. Castillo entered last, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. Then he simply stood there, watching her. Mia's composure finally cracked. "Say something," she demanded, her voice rising with desperation. "Yell at me. Hit me. Do something." "Nothing. I loved you." The words tore from her throat, raw and jagged. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her careful makeup. "I gave you everything. 5 years, Castillo. 5 years of my life, standing by your side through every war, every betrayal, every impossible choice. I never asked you to change. I never asked you to leave this world. I accepted all of it, accepted you." Castillo's expression remained perfectly blank. "And then she appeared," Mia continued, gesturing wildly. "This woman who knew nothing about your life, nothing about what it takes to survive in your world. Filtered. Everything I had to carve out of myself to be strong enough for you. And you," her voice broke, "you chose her. You looked at everything we built and threw it away like garbage." She waited for him to argue, to defend himself, to show any sign that her words were landing. He said nothing. "I tried to move on," Mia whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "God, I tried. But everywhere I went I heard your name. Saw your empire growing. Heard stories about your perfect wife, your perfect life. Like I never existed. Like those 5 years meant nothing." She took a step toward him, her hands outstretched, pleading. "So yes, I came here to hurt you. To make you feel what you made me feel. To take away the thing you love most so you'd finally understand. You're still talking." 3 words. The first he'd spoken since they entered the room. They stopped Mia cold. Castillo moved then, walking past her to the head of the conference table. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his movements unhurried. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Mia's legs carried her forward mechanically. She sat, her hands trembling in her lap. Up close, she could finally see something in his eyes. Not rage, not grief, but something far more terrifying. Calculation. "You want me to understand your pain," Castillo said quietly. "You want me to acknowledge what we had. You want me to admit that leaving you was wrong." He leaned forward slightly. "I won't." The words were simple, final, devastating. "What we had ended the moment I met her," he continued. "Not because you weren't enough. Not because she was better. But because when I looked at Kinsley, I saw something I didn't know I was capable of wanting." "What?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. "Peace." The word hung between them. "You and I," Castillo said. "We were fire. Constant. Consuming. We burned through everything around us. And I thought that's what love was supposed to be. Destruction held at bay by mutual understanding." He stood, buttoning his cuffs with precise movements. "But Kinsley showed me that love doesn't have to feel like war. Can feel like coming home. Like safety. Like building something instead of watching everything burn." "So that's it." Mia's voice hardened, anger replacing desperation. "You get to move on, start fresh, and I'm just supposed to disappear? Except that I meant nothing. You meant everything, Castillo said. For a time. And then you didn't. He walked to the door, his hand on the handle, and finally, turned to look at her fully. You came here to take from me, he said. To destroy what I love. To prove that if you couldn't have happiness, neither could I. Mia said nothing. There was nothing left to say. So now, Castillo continued, his voice dropping to something quiet and terrible, I take from you. Not your life, that would be mercy. Not your freedom, that would be quick. Take everything else. Your reputation. Your allies. Your future. Your name. He opened the door. I want you to live, Mia. I want you to live a very long life. Long enough to understand that some choices can't be undone. Long enough to watch from the outside as my family grows, as my wife recovers, as the world you tried to destroy thrives without you in it. Guards appeared in the doorway. Take her, Castillo said simply. And as Mia was pulled from her chair, as reality finally crashed down around her, she realized that this was never going to be a confrontation. It was a sentencing. And she had written her own verdict the moment she walked into that hospital room. 3 days later, Mia Butler ceased to exist. Not physically. Castillo had meant what he said about keeping her alive. But in every way that mattered, the woman who had walked into that hospital with purpose and rage was gone. It started with her accounts. Mia sat in the holding cell. Not a prison, but a private facility owned by someone in Castillo's network, when her lawyer arrived with papers. Her hands shook as she read through the documents, each page more devastating than the last. Every account, frozen then seized. The offshore holdings she'd spent years building. Transferred to shell corporations she couldn't trace. The properties in her name, the penthouse in Manhattan, the villa in Tuscany, the safe house in Prague. All of them sold overnight to anonymous buyers for fractions of their value. Her investment portfolio, carefully cultivated over a decade, liquidated. How? She whispered, looking up at her lawyer. How is this legal? The lawyer, a man who had represented her family for 20 years, wouldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Butler, I've been instructed to inform you that my firm can no longer represent you. Conflict of interest. Conflict of. Mia's voice rose. I've paid your retainer for the next 2 years. The retainer has been returned. He stood, gathering his papers with obvious discomfort. I'm sorry, truly, but there are forces at work here that are beyond my capacity to fight. He left before she could respond. The next blow came from her family. Her father, a man who had built his own empire in the pharmaceutical industry, who had always told her she was his pride, his legacy, sent a statement through his publicist. The Butler family has no association with Mia Butler. Her actions are her own and do not reflect the values of our organization. We wish her well but can offer no support at this time. No support at this time. The words were chosen carefully. Professional. Final. When Mia called her mother's private line, the number had been disconnected. Her sister's phone went straight to voicemail. A new message, professionally recorded, stating that this number was no longer accepting calls. They had excised her like a tumor. Cut her out completely to save themselves from whatever contamination her name now carried. But the cruelest blow came from the world she and Castillo had once navigated together. The criminal underworld operated on respect, fear, and reputation. Mia had spent years building her standing, not as Castillo's woman, but as a power in her own right. She had contacts in 6 countries. people who owed her favors, allies who had sworn loyalty. Within 48 hours, every single one of them received the same message. Video. 30 seconds long. It showed Mia in Kinsley's hospital room. Her hand on the oxygen line, disconnecting it. It showed her leaning close to whisper in a dying woman's ear. It showed her watching, waiting, satisfied. And beneath the video, a simple caption. Asterisk, this is what betrayal looks like. This is what happens when obsession becomes murder. Mia Butler is not to be trusted, not to be helped, not to be acknowledged. Anyone who offers her shelter, support, or sanctuary will answer to me personally. CB. Asterisk. The video went viral through encrypted channels, passed from phone to phone, screen to screen, until everyone who mattered had seen it. Her name became poison. Contacts she'd cultivated for years blocked her numbers. Safe houses she'd used suddenly had new owners who didn't know her. Black market brokers who had moved millions for her claimed they'd never heard her name. One former ally, a woman Mia had helped escape prosecution 3 years ago, sent a single text message. Asterisk. You went after a pregnant woman. There's no coming back from that. Don't contact me again. Asterisk. Mia sat in the sparse apartment Castillo's people had arranged for her. A studio in a forgotten neighborhood, barely furnished, the kind of place she would have never noticed in her previous life, and stared at the walls. She wasn't in prison. There were no bars on her windows, no guards at her door. But she was more trapped than any cell could make her. No money, no family, no allies, no future. Just a room and memories, and the crushing weight of consequences. On the 4th day a package arrived. Inside was a tablet, already powered on, queued to a news article. Asterisk, Kinsley Bennett, wife of prominent businessman Castillo Bennett, has made a full recovery following complications during childbirth. Both mother and child are reported to be healthy and in good spirits. Mrs. Bennett released a statement thanking the medical staff and expressing gratitude for the support she's received during this difficult time. Asterisk. Below the article was a photo. Kinsley, sitting up in a hospital bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white. Her smile was tired but genuine, alive, radiant, victorious, and beside her, standing like a sentinel, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, Castillo, not looking at the camera, looking at his wife, at his child, his future. Mia stared at the image until the screen went dark. Then she set the tablet down and understood, finally and completely, what Castillo had done. He hadn't taken her life. He'd given her one, a long, empty, unchangeable one, where every morning she would wake up and remember what she'd lost, what she'd destroyed, what she could never ever get back. This wasn't revenge. This was eternity. The first thing Kinsley heard when she woke was breathing. Not her own, though that came next, steady and strong, filling her lungs with air that felt like a gift. But someone else's. Lows. Rhythmic. The sound of another person sitting vigil in the darkness. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the dim light of the private recovery room. The monitors beeped softly, a gentle counterpoint to the breathing. No alarms, no panic, just the quiet hum of a body healing. And there, in the chair pulled close to her bedside, was Castillo. He hadn't changed clothes. His white shirt was wrinkled, sleeves still rolled to his elbows, collar loosened. His hair, usually perfectly styled, fell across his forehead. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of hours without sleep. But he was there, His hand rested on the edge of her bed, fingers inches from hers, as if he'd been holding her hand and had only just released it. His eyes were closed, his head tilted back against the chair, but something in his posture suggested he wasn't truly asleep. Just resting. Waiting. Always waiting. Kinsley tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her voice lost somewhere in the aftermath of trauma. She managed a small sound, barely more than a whisper. It was enough. Castillo's eyes opened immediately. He straightened, leaning forward, his hand moving to cover hers completely. His touch was warm, solid, real. "Don't try to talk," he said quietly. His voice was rough, scraped raw by something other than physical exhaustion. "You're safe. You're okay." Kinsley's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand weakly, asking the question she couldn't voice. Castillo understood. He always understood. "She's perfect," he said, and for the first time since Kinsley had known him, she heard his voice break. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal the fault lines beneath his control. "Our daughter. She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Strong lungs. Trust me, the nurses know." A sob caught in Kinsley's throat. Relief and joy and overwhelming love all tangled together. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them, didn't want to stop them. Castillo stood and leaned over her, his free hand moving to cup her face with infinite gentleness. His thumb brushed away her tears, though new ones kept coming. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words seemed pulled from somewhere deep inside him, a place he rarely let anyone see. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop it before it started. I'm sorry you had to feel that fear." Kinsley shook her head as much as she could, trying to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he'd saved her, that she was here because of him. But Castillo wasn't finished. "I watched you struggling to breathe," he continued, his forehead lowering to rest against hers. "I watched you fighting for our daughter, and I couldn't. I had to wait. Had to let it happen long enough to have proof. And I will never forgive myself for those minutes." Kinsley found her voice then, hoarse and broken but determined. "You saved us. I almost lost you. But you didn't." She squeezed his hand harder, pouring everything she couldn't say into that touch. "We're here. We're alive. Because of you." Castillo pulled back slightly, enough to look into her eyes. In the low light, she could see everything he usually kept hidden. The fear he'd carried, the rage he'd controlled, the love that drove every calculated decision. The world outside these walls knew him as a force of nature. A man to be feared. A power that bent circumstances to his will through intimidation and strategic cruelty. But Kinsley saw something else. She saw a man who had sat by her bedside for 3 days without sleeping, his hand always touching hers. A man who had dismantled another person's entire existence not through violence but through the methodical application of consequences. A man who had whispered his first apology in years because he'd let her suffer for minutes, not hours, not days, but minutes, to ensure justice would be absolute. She saw a man who loved her so completely that he'd turned his greatest strength, his ruthlessness, into a shield around her and their child. "Where is she?" Kinsley asked, her eyes moving toward the bassinet she now noticed in the corner of the room. Castillo followed her gaze and something shifted in his expression, the hard edges softening into something approaching wonder. "They brought her in an hour ago. After the final test. Everything's perfect." He moved to the bassinet and lifted their daughter with a care that seemed impossible from hands that had destroyed lives. The baby was wrapped in soft white blankets, her tiny face peaceful in sleep, a small pink hat covering her head. Castillo returned to Kinsley's side and gently, so gently, placed their daughter in her arms. Kinsley looked down at the small miracle resting against her chest and felt something break open inside her. Not pain, but a flood of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. This tiny person, this perfect combination of everything she and Castillo were, had survived. They had all survived. What should we name her? Castillo asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, one arm behind Kinsley for support, the other hand resting protectively on their daughter's back. Kinsley looked at her child, then at the man who had moved heaven and earth to keep them both alive. Hope, she whispered. Her name is Hope. Because that's what she represented. Not just survival but the promise of something better. A future built on love instead of fear. A life that could grow in the shelter of her father's protection without being consumed by the darkness of his world. Castillo leaned down and pressed a kiss to Kinsley's temple, then to their daughter's forehead. Hope, he repeated, testing the name. Then, quieter, almost to himself. Yes. And for the first time in 3 days, he let himself breathe. The compound transformed overnight. Castillo didn't just fortify the walls. He rebuilt the entire security infrastructure from the ground up. New guards vetted personally. Cameras with encrypted feeds only he controlled. Safe rooms disguised as ordinary spaces. Every person who entered their home now passed through 3 layers of clearance. Kinsley watched him work with quiet admiration. This wasn't paranoia. This was love made tangible. You're doing too much, she said one evening, finding him in his office at 2 a.m, reviewing security protocols. He looked up, shadows under his eyes but determination blazing through them. I'm doing what I should have done from the beginning. He stood, crossing to her, hands cradling her growing belly. I won't lose either of you. Not to anyone. Not ever again. She leaned into his touch. You won't. Within weeks, word spread through the underworld. Not just about Elena's betrayal, but about Kinsley's survival. The woman who had walked through fire and refused to burn. The one Castillo Torres had chosen, protected, and would destroy entire empires to keep safe. Respect came slowly, then all at once. When she appeared at meetings, conversations didn't stop. They shifted to include her. When she spoke, people listened. Not because she was Castillo's wife, but because she had earned her place in a world that didn't give anything freely. She became a legend in her own right. The woman who survived what should have killed her. The one who turned betrayal into armor. Months passed. The baby grew. Castillo's empire stabilized, stronger than before. Not through fear, but through calculated loyalty and the clear message that protection came to those who proved their worth, and death came swiftly to those who betrayed it. The day their daughter was born, Castillo held her with hands that had taken countless lives, now trembling with the weight of something infinitely more precious. Isabella, Kinsley whispered, exhausted but radiant. It means devoted to God. Or devoted to family, Castillo murmured, brushing his lips against the baby's forehead. He looked at Kinsley, and she saw everything in his eyes. The violence he'd committed, the protection he'd provided, the man he'd become because of her. Their daughter became a symbol throughout the organization. Not of weakness, but of rebirth. Proof that even in the darkest world, new life could emerge. That loyalty could be rewarded with something beyond money or power, with legacy. Years later, Kinsley would stand in their rebuilt home, watching Castillo teach their daughter to be strong, to be smart, to protect what mattered. She would remember Elena's twisted obsession, the poison that nearly destroyed them, and understand the difference. Obsession takes. Love protects. Obsession destroys everything it touches. Love builds fortresses around what matters most. Elena had wanted to possess Castillo, to own him through manipulation and death. She had confused control with connection, cruelty with passion. But Castillo had shown Kinsley the truth. Real power wasn't in how many people you could hurt. Real power was in choosing who got to live. Who got to stay in your world. Who was worth protecting, even when it meant becoming a monster to everyone else. Love wasn't soft. Love was steel wrapped in silk. Love was the choice to burn the world down for one person and call it justified. Kinsley had survived because Castillo's love was a weapon. Sharp, lethal, and aimed at anything that threatened her. And in this dark world they'd built together, that was the only kind of love worth having. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this story. Every view, every comment, every moment you spend here keeps these stories alive. If you felt this one, make sure to subscribe, and let me know you watched to the end.